Hello, everyone. It is Shayna Rattler, and welcome back to an episode of a God Shift podcast. I am excited about this episode. I know I say that all the time, but I'm really excited about this one because it's been a while. It has been a while since I've been on a lot of other people's podcasts. I've been doing a lot of media. Many of you know that we recently wrapped up season 1 of my television show. And so this is the very first time in a while that I have actually done a podcast myself. So I pray that I'm not rusty. So if you're new to this podcast, one of the things that I ask that you do is that wherever you're listening to this podcast from, whether it's on your telephone, whether it's on your computer, your device, I would love if you would take a screenshot of you watching this episode, and if you will post it on social media. And when you do post it, if you will tag us at a God Shift, it just gives us the opportunity to get these episodes into the hands of more people, because what I know is that people are able to identify with the stories of the guests that we have on, and the more people that can hear these podcasts, the more people's lives that we can impact. So again, if you will take a screenshot of you listening to the podcast, post it on your social media, and tag us here at A God Shift, I would appreciate it. So let me read my guest's bio. We've been chatting for a bit. So I want to go ahead and I want to read her official bio, and then I will turn it over to her, and we will find out a little bit more in her own words about who she is in the world, how she shows up, and how she is helping people. So author and entrepreneur Joi Fisher-Griffin, recently married in the pandemic, is an experienced educator, a passionate adoption advocate, and patron of the arts. After going through her own struggles as an adoptee, Joi wrote her memoir, Finding Joy, a true story of faith, family, and love, which debuted in 2019. She shared her story so she could help others who sit in silence about their struggles, and she continues to find ways to be open about adoption, not only with adults, but to start the conversation with young people too. She is the author of 2 best-selling children's adoption books. These books are part of normalizing conversations around adoption through the Belong Project, an adoption awareness campaign. Joi serves as the adoptee and survivor team coordinator with Miriam's Heart organization in New Jersey. She believes adoptive and foster families can find the resources and their community of support if we all stop whispering and let's talk adoption. So welcome to the show, Joi Fisher-Griffin. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Good. We kind of look like we could be related. So if you're listening,
I know it, and this would be the second time that has happened with another podcaster. I did find out that we were related. So
really,
who knows?
Here's what's interesting. So for those of you who are listening to the podcast, you have no idea what we're talking about, period. But for those of you
who are
watching on YouTube, what you don't know is that this is the very first time in 2 years that I've had my hair straight. So 99% of the time, my hair looks exactly like Joi's. We literally have the same curl pattern. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I digress. So Joi, I read your official bio. It's awesome. But tell us a little bit more about who you are as a person and exactly what is it that you're doing to help people through these adoption processes.
Yeah, I'm an educator of about 25 years now, and I'm an adoption advocate and an author. And 4 years ago, our laws changed in New Jersey, and I was able to obtain my original birth certificate. I've always known that I was adopted. I've known since I was at least 4 years old, but I never started talking about it until 4 years ago. And that was when the legislation changed, and I began to learn a little bit about what advocacy work that was being done throughout my lifetime that I didn't even know that in our state of New Jersey that was going on. I had an opportunity to attend the legislative celebration of the law on a whim. And I went, and that was the first time in my 40s that I was around people who were adopted parents, and birth parents. That was the first time I heard people have an open conversation about being adopted. Adoption, anytime you really bring up the word, it brings up a sense of shame, a sense of fear, and lots of secrecy around adoption. So to be in that room 4 years ago with people who were all connected to adoption, who talked about it just like it was everyday life, I wanted to know who the heck they were, how I could get involved and find out what organizations or what support groups they offered. And I wondered then if I had been around people like that when I was younger, would I have waited until I was in my 40s to even start talking about my own adoption journey? Would I have kept all those things that I kept silent and I just kind of struggled with along the way to myself if I had been around other people where the conversation seemed normal? And so that's really been my goal since I met them, was to, one, find out how they got to that healing place, because I struggled silently. And I knew that there were some things that if I talked about it, that it would help. So I wanted to find out who they were, how they got to their healing place. And then as I looked around that room that day during the celebration, again, a state celebration, there were 4 Black people in the room.
Yeah.
And one of them was the guest speaker. So I knew that had I not been there that day, that information I would have had to rely on what came out in the newspapers the next day. And that information doesn't always make it to our communities. So not only is it a topic that we don't talk about, period, overall, but we really don't talk about it in the Black community. And then to be there in the room, 4 people of about 90 or 100 folks who were in the room, 4 people of color, I knew that I just felt led to do something, to, once I got to a better place where I could deal with it and be able to share my story, that I felt responsible to now go and help other people, because I was getting help from this group of advocates that had been fighting for 34 years in the state of New Jersey for the laws to change. So I felt like I owed them something. And some of the folks who were advocates right in New Jersey weren't even born in New Jersey. So the law had no impact on them, but yet all these years they were fighting and I was about the benefit. So from there is when I began to learn the adoption sensitive language and to begin to educate myself on, some of the things that are going on and how I can help people. And being an educator, here I am in schools with children who are adopted and in foster care. And I had never even approached that subject, even when I knew it about certain children. So I began to feel kind of convicted in that, okay, now you're getting your healing. So you also have to help those young people who you see on a daily basis. So I've been trying to do it on a couple different fronts
Let me ask you
to be a
question,
voice.
just because I'm curious. So I heard you say that the law changed. So I'm curious, what was it before it changed? And are you referring specifically to, like, typically do people who are adopted, are they not allowed to have their original birth certificate, or did you just not have access to yours? That's just my own curious question.
Yeah, good. That's a great question too. And I probably should have mentioned that as I was talking. In New Jersey, in 1940s, the laws changed so that if you were adopted, you were given an amended birth certificate. So between 1940 and 2015, anyone who was adopted might adopt my birth certificate when I was of school age and in school was amended. It had my adopted parents' name on there, the name that I was given by them, my birth weight, my birth height, and my birth date. And that was it. So that's all I have on my birth certificate, versus when you look at some other folks' long birth certificate, you have lots of other information. That's the hospital you were born in and all those details. And as an adoptee, depending on the state you lived in, your records were closed and you didn't get access to that information. So that's what the law in New Jersey was fighting for, the rights for adoptees to get their original birth certificate. And so it was impacting that the cluster of us that were born between 1940 and 2015. And that legislation kicked in 2017. But the caveat to that was that our birth parents had an option a couple years prior. They could say, okay, we don't want our names given to our child, we want it redacted. So there was a chance that as many of us were getting our original birth certificates from the state once you applied, that you might get it back, but the names may be blacked out.
Yeah.
And so that every state is different though. So what happens in New Jersey in that cluster of years that focuses in our particular state is going to be something different in New York, something different in Connecticut, something different, wherever you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to get into your story a little bit different. So, this is the God Shift podcast. And my definition of a God shift is anytime there's some form of disruption in your life and you ultimately end up colliding with God's purpose and getting where it is that you need to be. That's kind of the short version of what I believe many people. I think God uses unexpected circumstances, right, to get our attention. He uses disruption to get our attention.
Right.
So should we assume that you being adopted was where you feel like your disruption or your God shift is, or was it some other form of delay or disappointment or something like that? Tell us about it.
There were a number of things that I think that where that shift happened with God shift or God moment. I refer to it in the book. I know some people say God winked.
Yeah, God winks. Yeah.
God winks. Yeah. So that in this case, it was getting out of an unhealthy marriage that I was wearing a mask in and acting like everything was okay, and finally got to the point where I said, love doesn't feel like this. Love shouldn't feel like this. And that I had to start changing some things in my life, not only for myself, but also for my children. And it was at that moment that I began to realize that, God's, sometimes we do things in our own will. And we, we say we're going to turn it over to God, but we don't really pray about it. We don't really put it before him. We just kind of keep doing, but we're doing and moving in our own way. And I learned that.
Or if we do give it to him, we pick it back up.
We pick it back up. Yes. Yes.
Right? Like, okay, Lord, I'm going to give it to you. And then I put my hands back on. Lord, I'm going to give it to you. And I put my hands back on it. He's like, I'll wait.
Yep. And then when we do that, we get in our own way. So I found myself making decisions about life and doing it my way, because I felt that maybe this is the way that I should go, rather than praying about it, rather than giving it some time, rather than just seeing where God was leading me and trusting some of the people that were around me. Yeah. And I one of the things that our preacher preached about, and his words, 3 words for the sermon were work, worship, and wait. And I was so busy trying to get to the end of things that I wasn't doing the work on myself. Yeah. I wasn't praising him and thanking him for the things that I had. I was, in my little rut, and I wasn't really waiting along the way. And I think along the journey, all these things were kind of exposed to me that maybe I didn't talk about my adoption all these years, but there was a reason why I ended up that day at the legislative announcement in a room with very few people who look like me. And I think that was a God moment. That was a God shift of God showing me that, yes, you did have some challenges and you had some struggles, but you're seeing right here firsthand that people can be healed. And this isn't the end being adopted, that it's a part of your journey. And it's a part of your journey that's not only going to help you once you get some help, once you work on yourself, and then I'm going to use you to help other people. Yeah. So
what do you think he was trying to get you to see or get you to learn? Because here's what I always am fascinated by, is that normally by the time it's been it's usually more of a shove. Like we're giving all of these smaller opportunities to shift. We chose to ignore it. Mm-hmm. And then it's like he had to shove us. Like it starts off as a God shift and it ends up being a God shoved, a God shove. So what exactly do you feel like it was that he was trying to get your attention so that you could see or learn what?
That you're smart enough, that I was smart enough, that you're worthy, that I'm lovable. As an adoptee, I never spoke about it, but I always struggled with, if my mother, and you often hear people say, gave you up. If your mother gave you up, who else in the world is going to want you?
Yeah.
Well, who are you truly lovable if your own mother didn't even keep you? Yeah. And through those moments and through those times and through meeting different people, I realized, number one, that I was lovable. 2, that these were just some challenges that adoptees face that were adoption issues, and that I just had to learn more about that I was normal. So things that I thought were quirky and weird and just different from other members of my adopted family, I realized were just a part of my genetic makeup after a while, and that I just had to get out of my own way. And just, even in this, not trying to figure out, well, what is the end of this going to look like? What does God really have set for me to do? And just to be on the journey, just to trust, have faith, and be on the journey that he's going to guide, whether it's a career, whether it's a ministry. I'm not sure, I'm not sure where he's leading me, but right now it's all I keep hearing him say is just do the work. So do the work, share your story. It's going to help somebody just like somebody else's story helped you.
So how did you respond? I'm using these circumstances to get your attention so that you can recognize that you are smart enough, you are loved, you are worthy. How did you respond?
I responded by getting in and doing the work and no longer trying to figure out what the end game is going to look like, what the end product is supposed to be, without trying to make sure everything was perfect and in place, but to just go ahead and, if I felt led to speak to someone about my journey, to talk to them. If I felt led to go and get involved with, we had a youth group right in our high school to find out what they were about, of adoptees and foster youth, to go ahead and do it, to stop being afraid. And I think that's removing some of that fear that I felt, removing the shame that I felt, that came along with, being adopted, that you hear adoptees talk about all the time. And to just really get to a point to get other people to talk about it so that we can normalize the conversation. Everybody knows somebody who's adopted.
Yeah, I want to unpack something for a moment, because you used some language that I hear almost daily.
Okay.
So regardless of what someone is overcoming, either the recommendation that they do, or when they look back, they say they have done, is the term "do the work." I did the work. Give us some examples of what that looks like. Because for me, when people listen to my podcast, when they watch my television show, I want to make sure that they have tangible, bite-sized nuggets that they can go, oh, great, I saw myself in their story, and I want to be able to overcome the way that they overcame. And so I hear that almost daily, like, oh, you either need to do the work or I did the work. Unpack that a little bit more so it doesn't just feel like this, this ambiguous theoretical giant in the room.
Right. Understood. Yeah. And doing the work for me was acknowledging that I needed help, acknowledging that I couldn't do this by myself, acknowledging that part of my help was going to come from counseling. Part of my help was going to come from a support group, and to get that mindset out of my head that counseling is for crazy people. No, there's people that just need help. And sometimes it's about figuring out why we think a certain way, and counselors can help you do that. So Absolutely. A lot of my work dealt with counseling and support groups and being honest. And I always tell people, counseling is great, but if you're going to go in and you're not going to tell the truth, and you're not going to, they're not there to judge you. And if you just, and that's part of the work, going in, being honest, do the work in terms of following through with what you're asked to think about or to write about, and then coming back to your next session prepared to do that. A couple of our preachers, which I always appreciated, would talk about the importance of counseling in different parts of their sermons at time. And they would say, God has created and placed people in certain positions to be able to do, because that's their area of expertise. And that those are the folks that we should be leaning on, not necessarily, your girlfriend next door or your guy friend over here who might not be able to be that non-judgmental ear, but who might be able to help you double back to some of those things in your past that have gotten you to your thinking of the present.
Absolutely. Or dare I say, and yes, I'm about to bust y'all's bubble, because yes, this is the God Shift podcast, or relying just on Jesus.
Yes.
I think the first thing that we have to recognize is that if you're willing to get help, that means there's something right with you, not something wrong with you. Let's start there. And especially in the Black community, where getting help is so taboo, like, oh, we just believe in Jesus. Well, I believe in him too. And he has a role to play, and we have a role to play. And there are gifts and anointings that he has planted into people to be able to help you, because half the time y'all can't sit still long enough to hear his voice anyway.
Absolutely. And that's what I appreciated about the preachers of the churches that I went to at the time, because they were very honest about that. Yeah. Yes, prayer is, and they would say, we're not saying don't pray about it. We're saying pray, and then that's when they would go into doing the work. Pray and you have to do the work. Pray and seek a counselor. Pray and seek a counselor. And then if that counselor doesn't work for you, that doesn't mean counseling doesn't work. It just means that maybe that counselor wasn't a good match for you. So those are some of the things in terms of doing the work that I'm referring to. Writing your thoughts out in journals. That was something that was big for me. And that's really what led to the pieces that came together in my book. There are certain things you can't, or you don't feel comfortable saying to your friends or your family, but it's something about that experience of writing things down. And even if it's writing it, putting it in an envelope, something you want to say to somebody, but maybe, you shouldn't, and just don't send it, but at least you get that kind of stuff off of your chest. So I think those were all really, those were truly God shifts for me, because with each, as I began to, go to counseling and get the support and be open with my conversation and be honest with what I was feeling, and just take some leaps of faith in terms of things that just didn't feel right, like I should be moving in that direction. But I kind of just kept getting led to do certain things, getting back into church, making sure that I was reading scripture and going to prayer groups when I could. And then the other thing, music for me, music is healing. And the other part of the work was sometimes turning off some of the TV shows that I watch,
Yeah.
and retraining or refreshing my mind with some more positive things, not the guilty pleasure stuff.
Right. One of the things that I say often is that, when we're looking at why God is allowing things to happen to us, like number one, we have to recognize that it happened for us and not, it happened to us and not, or I'm sorry, it happened for us and not to us, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And a God shift is going to be required, that there is another level of destiny for every single one of us on the other side of that disruption. But
Absolutely.
a God shift is going to be required in order to reveal it and access it. And I believe that one of the number one things that we have to do when we're trying to put our God shift in motion is that we have to elevate God's position in our life in order to implement well. In your opinion, why is putting God first or putting your faith first or elevating God's position in your life, like in your opinion, why is that so important?
I think that's what we're called to do. I think every time that I found myself putting myself first, or what I thought was right first, I wasn't leading myself down the right path. I was doing things because I thought it was the best thing to do, where I would say that I was going to pray about it, but I didn't necessarily pray about it because I would go ahead and do what I felt was right because I felt that I knew what I was doing. But I've really learned to just take the moment, stop and pray about it, and then give it time. God's answer isn't going to come to you immediately all the time. Sometimes he might need you to sit in something before he works everything out. But I think his will is always going to be done. And sometimes we just have to be patient too. Yeah. There was something I wrote on my, I have all these little Post-its, and then years ago, I didn't believe in the Post-its all over the place, but I have them on my computer at work. And I wrote down a couple of them because I wanted to share it. One of them says, "This too shall pass. What does not destroy me will only make me stronger." Yeah. And just having some of those positive affirmations around you. And do I read them every day? No, but I wanted to make sure that they don't become like wallpaper. So I do try to go through and read them at least once a week, and just reminding yourself of those things as well, to some of those positive affirmations.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Our thoughts become, our beliefs become our thoughts become our actions become our reality. So it's so encouraging to hear that that's working for you as well. Like, let me put these little notes up. Let me put these little reminders up. Not because I don't believe it, because like you said, we get so caught up in everyday life. We get so caught up in what it is that we want to do and what we want to have, that we sometimes lose sight of some of those realities. Mm-hmm. And God forbid something not go our way. The very first thing we start to do is doubt.
Yep.
I was just sharing with someone a couple of hours ago that I was getting my hair done last night, and I was talking about some frustrations that I'm having in another business. And my stylist said to me, yes, all the variables that you are up against are things that are out of your control, but let's not forget who you are. Like, you're creative, you're resourceful, you're like, why do I have to remind you of all the things that you remind your clients of, right?
Yeah.
I love that. So,
and that was definitely a God shift, and God placing you in that chair at that time, needing to hear that from her in that moment.
Man, listen, it's tricky, but it was on point. And I was just like, thank you for that. You don't know how much I needed that, because it's easy to focus on like, well, I can't do this, like that is out of my control. I've got to wait for that. This is happening. There's absolutely nothing I can do about that. I can't speed up the process, but what can you do?
Right.
So I had to eat my own advice, but at least I give good advice. So when it gets given back to me, it's
that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And there's another thing that I had on my desk, Romans 8:28. And then the little quote said, "What, Lord, what are you saying or trying to show me in the middle of the situation?" When you're busy trying to figure out why you're going through something, just stopping for a minute and asking God that question and praying that, that answer will come to you.
I love that. I say, the question comes down to, what are you supposed to see? What are you supposed to learn? And where are you needed next?
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
And sometimes we don't always have that clarity. But anyway, I want to pause for a quick sponsored ad break, and then we will come back and we will give a little bit more tips about people that are in your situation and how they can overcome disruption and put their God shift in motion.
Okay.
This episode is brought to you by the free guide When God Says Shift. Inside, you'll discover the 4 shifts required to follow God's plan to move you out of disruption and into a greater destiny, expectancy, and possibility. Head to GodSaysShift.com to access it now. So, Joi, what advice would you give someone if their story may not be your story? They may
Mhm.
not have been adopted. They may not know anything about, what it's like to live in the life of someone who is, who has been adopted. But
Mhm.
if they are struggling either to overcome disruption or if they are struggling to put their faith first, like what is 1 or 2 tips that you would give them of how they can do that?
I would say surrounding yourself by other people of faith or other people who inspire you or who motivate you. One of the things I often tell my daughters is, who's your 5? Who's your 5 folks that are around you? And I heard this speaker not too long ago, and he was saying, not only who are your 5 folks around you, but if the 5 folks around you don't encourage you or inspire you to do better things, then you're not really in a friend circle, you're in a friend cage. And then
Wow.
sometimes you might need to step outside of that group of people and regroup yourself. But find some people who you strive to do some of the things that they do, or who encourage you and motivate you, who often, like your friend in the beauty salon or your beautician the other day, who remind you of some of the things and the advice that you give others, just to keep you fresh and to keep you uplifted as well. So I think it's who you surround yourself with as well. Find your moments to praise and worship and to pray. And I truly believe that sometimes we just have to turn things over to God and go ahead and wait on him to give us an answer. And that can be difficult because we want it to happen now. We want, well, why am I not getting a response? And trust your intuition on some things as well. One of my prayers has been asking God to help me release my fears and to trust what he says, so that I'm not constantly doubting, as you said, and second guessing,
Right.
things that are coming before me and in front of me. And there are things that are going to come through leaps of faith where you're just going to have to step out there and try and do it. But
Yeah.
if you have that circle of 5 or those folks around you who are there to support you and to motivate you, if you're praying and asking God to release you from your fears and trusting him, your steps will be guided. Your steps
Yeah.
will be guided. And get in the word and find someone who can pour that word into you to help you understand as you're going through. And I always definitely would recommend counseling and being able to find somebody who can, speak those other things to you in terms of retraining your brain and how you think and how you think about yourself and your goals and aspirations and things of that nature.
Yeah. The scripture that you just mentioned says that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, meaning past tense. So, he's not waiting to see what we're going to do next to order our steps. Now, granted, there's some things that he may have to do to course correct because of the things that we do, or
That we do, right?
We may have to course correct some things. But while we were in our mother's belly, he knew us. Before he formed us, he knew us. He anointed us. So the fact that it says that the steps of a good man are ordered, why do we freak out? Like, why are we like, oh God, what are you going to do? I already did it. There's so many of us that, and I don't want to go off on a tangent because we're getting ready to wrap up, but there are so many of us that have sight and no vision. And it's like, we're so worried about what God is going to do next. He's already done it. Like, we have to recognize that just because we haven't seen it with our natural eyes, in the spirit, it's already happened. Will we be patient enough, and when will we wait well and not get in his way is what it really comes down to.
Yeah. And that's been always been one of my prayers. And I didn't realize how often and how much I pray. I would always say that I don't think I prayed enough. But when I actually wrote the memoir, every time I was writing different chapters, there were stories that included what I prayed about in that situation. And then that's when I realized, I pray a whole lot more than I really thought about it, because oftentimes I'm thinking, okay, prayer on the side of the bed, your hands closed, and then I'm going, no, but you're praying in the car, you're praying at work, you're praying as situations go through, as you're going through situations. And I was like, wow, and that's something I think that people do or can do when they're going through things as well. Don't wait till you get home until it's, late at night when you're saying your prayers and thanking God for what he's done. Do it right then when it happens. And that's one of the things that I've been trying to do. When we say we're going to pray for people, pray for them right then and there. It doesn't mean you have to do it later. Just go ahead and get it done. So I think improving my prayer life, I know for me has been a big part of me turning things over to God. And then sometimes I'll realize I didn't turn it over to God. And then I'll have to say, okay, you can't keep trying to fix this yourself. Yeah. Give it to him. As one of our pastors used to say, if you're gonna worry, don't pray. But if you're gonna pray, don't worry. Because God's got you.
It's almost like it's disrespectful.
Yes.
Like, here I am, the Almighty God. I'm God all by myself. And you're going to pray and then worry? Like, it's disrespectful.
Right.
Put some respect on my name.
Yes.
All right, Joy, we're going to get ready to wrap this up. So where can people find you and how can they take things further with you if they would like to?
Yeah, my website is Finding Joi, and that's joy with an I.us. And my so all of my social media is Finding Joi Renee, and that's Joy again with an I, Renee, Renee. And if folks want to reach out, you can send me, you can direct message me, or you can send me emails. You'll find that information on the website. And everything is pretty much there. I love music, so you'll find some music and theme songs that have gone along with each book. And for our educators out there, I do have some lesson plans, because I think if we start the conversations with our young people who are talking about everything else under the sun, then that can help us as the adults begin to open up to some of these conversations about adoption and about foster care, because those young people are in our schools, they're in our families, they're in our, in our neighborhoods. And if we can all be a part of normalizing that conversation, I just think it helps everybody in society.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. And the links to the website and your social media will all be in the show notes. So you don't have to remember, like, was it Joy with an I or a Y, and how do you spell Renee? So I will take care of that work for you.
Appreciate it.
The show notes. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. I know that this is going to be helpful to someone. And again, for those of you who are listening to the podcast, I ask that you share it. I ask that you take a screenshot and tag us here at A God Shift, and make sure that you listen to the other episodes as well. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.